Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Again, if you haven't seen me before, I'm Doug Straton, the CMO at Bazaarvoice, and I'm joined by Gregor Murray, who's the Chief Strategy, or as he likes to put it, so what, Officer at Digital Commerce Global, or DCG. We're going to keep this session really, really practical. In 30 minutes, what we want to do is leave you with two things. Number one, a clear way to spot where your content system is getting stuck, and two, a simple 90-day plan to fix it. Gregor, you work with brands across categories. What are you seeing right now that is making execution feel harder than it should?
Well, the big thing's speed, Doug. So, everyone's being asked to move faster. Teams are producing content, but it doesn't always move as one system. Content is getting trapped in handoffs. Standards vary, updates don't always travel, measurement lives in different pockets across the organization. But even when a strategy is really clear, execution can still feel really heavy.
Exactly. I saw the same thing when I was a CDO in my former life. And so this is, I think, a great tee up for the conversation for the rest of the session here. Here's how we're going to run it. Gregor's going to show you how to diagnose this bottleneck using what's called the SEEK framework. And I'll show you how to scale consumer voice once the foundation is stable. Before that, though, we're going to do a little context setting. What is a content supply chain? This is something that we at Bazaarvoice have been talking about for a couple of years, and I've built in my former life. But it's still a concept. If you haven't seen it before, it's worth a little bit of explaining. So I'm going to spend just a few seconds talking about that very quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Gregor. So the first thing to think about is what's changed in shopping. Shoppers aren't hunting keywords anymore. They're asking questions with a lot of intent. The best running shoe for wide feet, laptop bag under $50. That's the shift. When the shopper asks a question, the engines want an answer. AI, search, and social reward structured content that resolves intent. Now, we've seen the digital shelf balloon from thousands of products to millions. And at that scale, your UGC is a mandatory trust signal for both the algorithms and the humans. So if you aren't feeding the agentic layer with these authentic signals, you end up not really qualifying for discovery. And you lost your seat at the table before the shopper even knows you exist. So with that, the market has a new appetite, essentially. The simple way to think about it is this. Consumers and AI want identical fuel, content that's easy to access, genuinely real, and everywhere. So think about Netflix recommendations. They thrive on abundant, authentic signals. And brands should take this into account, that they can risk starving the discovery engines of about 70% of purchases if they ignore, we believe, AI going into the future. So what we recommend is doing for content what a traditional supply chain does to meet product demand. So let's assume, for sake of the presentation, that you're presenting to a cross-functional set of leaders. And you're trying to get across what a content supply chain is. And what I would say is just describe it as a traditional supply chain consisting of 5 steps: forecasting demand, manufacturing products, warehousing those products, distributing them to the outlets where they can be bought or consumed, and then analyzing the data to improve the next forecast. It's a well-known process. It's well-governed, increasingly automated, efficient, and scalable. And this is a great way to ensure that your audience understands kind of the underlying thinking and process behind a content supply chain. But now it's time to show them what that really is. And so you've landed this initial story, which is great, right? So begin by translating your traditional supply chain into the language of digital marketing. As you can see here, start speaking about the business outcomes first, the things that you see along the bottom here: reach, revenue, conversion, trust, experience, etc. And then explain each box starting with content consumption as a direct connection to the traditional supply chain that you just walked through. The goal, you say, is to reduce handoffs, complexity, and hidden costs while delivering scale and clear ROI. And this also sets you up for the future of a more personalized, dynamic, and contextualized content delivery system, as well as improved data hygiene, meta tagging, and other benefits that you're going to need in the age of AI. It's a really good idea when you present this to have a business case already built out for it. So these are I would say, the 2 slides that can help you land a story about what a content supply chain is and what types of business outcomes it drives. Now I'm going to pass it over to Gregor to spend a little bit of time describing a few things. And first, what we're going to say is that we're going to align on some obvious things. So that fragmented content kills shelf visibility. And that's really, really fundamental. That would be a strategic liability. Reviews in one place, content in another place, product details owned somewhere else, media assets in a totally different system yet again. And if you just see another content types are trapped in the silo, you effectively have zero visibility where it counts. And on the flip side, performance requires velocity. Moving content quickly is how we anchor trust the moment a shopper is ready to choose. But the real differentiator here is data governance. Clean data architecture isn't back office work. It's the engine that converts these signals into revenue. And that is a competitive differentiator. If you don't know where to start as it relates to overall capabilities that you already have and how to stitch them together, I have good news. I phoned in a friend. Gregor, I'm going to pass it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Doug. So look, the reason why leaders are focusing on capability is really simple. Capabilities are one of the core growth driving differentiators in a highly competitive industry. When the basics are strong, content stays consistent. Updates happen faster, teams are able to reuse assets, measurement can connect activity to outcomes. Now, a lot of teams here assume that the answer is another tool, but if ownership is unclear and standards vary by team, new tools just add complexity rather than actually removing friction. And this is where our SEEK model comes in. And it's also why we always start with diagnosis. You want clarity on your constraints before you try to scale anything. The SEEK content supply audit is a structured benchmark that shows where execution is being blocked. It's not a score for score's sake. It's designed to help provide focus. It helps you pinpoint the red zones that matter most. Things like digital shelf readiness, search performance, content quality and sufficiency, governance and compliance, and measurement discipline. The output is a short list of what to fix first in the order that will deliver the most profitable, sustainable results. So we identify the red zones, and then we help map what actions you should take. Content isn't just support. It's the engine that powers our SEEK benchmarking at every stage, and it turns those red zones into green lights, and it helps those leading manufacturers to generate up to 8% growth advantage every single year. In demand creation, it sharpens targeting with AI and research. For conversion, it smooths consumer journeys with ready ratings and reviews and joint business plans. And for profit contribution, it scales margins through playbooks and through data operations. Now, I'm going to drop the link to the audit into the chat. And once Doug has finished this session, you can go on and you can do your content supply audit and use it to fix your content supply chain and help you build that unbeatable SEEK foundation that helps drive growth across your business.
Thanks, Gregor. So the strategy is really straightforward, and treating consumer voice as a core input into it's essentially treating consumer voice as a core input into your commercial system. It's not just a campaign layer. It's something that's always on. We use the AAA framework, which you've heard about a couple times in different sessions throughout the day, as the quality bar to enable this, because it keeps us focused on what actually works. Accessible, again, it means your content is structured and consistent, so it can be used reliably across the shelf. Authentic means it reflects verified customer experience. Abundant means you have enough depth and freshness on the products and the content related to them that matter. So AAA really becomes the standard that underpins all of this. The content supply chain is the way you deliver it over and over and over again. Run it through a supply chain model so it moves from creation to activation to measurement without stalling. And that's how you can stay visible and build confidence and get chosen. I think the SEEK framework and the work that DCG does to essentially pinpoint the different elements in your both your point solutions and the capabilities that you have driving them, and then helping you think about how to connect them is just absolutely fundamental and a great way to get started thinking about these types of things. Now, if you're mapping the fix from audit to action, you need to show up consistently in high intent moments, and doing so usually comes back to coverage and consistency. So start with the accessible layer, make sure the product story is structured and reliable, then build depth and freshness to consumer voice at scale. So build upon your brand proposition and your core brand creative and content. Ratings, reviews, customer photos, sampling, syndication. When there's enough of these credible signals in the marketplace on the products that matter, this should drive rankings and surfaceability in AI environments, and your brand will really start to show up more. And that confidence that AI is showing reflects in the way that shoppers will interact with your brands and your products as well. And your performance overall should improve. Now, we think this system works across your entire organization. And if the bottleneck is governance, you start inside, essentially the system scales across your organization. So you really need to fix silos within your organization to get impact in terms of your content, supply chain, and UGC specifically. So the top challenge really is that siloed data and broken governance, which traps content in their individual point solutions or storage containers, essentially, and it just causes a lot of rework and a lot of confusion and inconsistency in your execution across all sorts of different touch points. So if you fix your foundations, you define your source of truth, the ownership over the different point solutions, the standards, the repeatable way that you approach process and approvals. Ultimately, this type of thinking can allow you to automate another AI use case in a slightly different sense. And then this is the beautiful thing is once you're doing all this, you can activate both through some of your other providers, but also through the Bazaarvoice network and its services, syndicating authentic UGC essentially everywhere. And the result that you get from this is more reach, traffic, and conversions through trusted content. Now, I love this. We get a lot of questions around what can I do in the next 90 days? And when I look at this, I think, well, we can put together a roadmap for 90 days, though. I think this can be a really difficult process, and you might want to bite off just chunks of the process as you go along. And you'll still be making significant movement towards ultimately the goal of having a full-blown content supply chain. But to conceptualize it, let's use those 90 days, whether it's going to take 90 days or 120 days or even 150 or 180. So a 90-day plan, in my view, day 0 to 30 really looks to diagnose, run the benchmark, in this case, what Gregor explained a few minutes ago, something like the Seek diagnostic, to identify the red zones that we went over quickly and define what success looks like. Days 30 to 60, what you should focus in on is fixing the structure, governance, and tracking so teams can move without rework and with a minimum of friction. And then once that's working, that would be days 60 to 90. See if you can scale it. So start with maybe one brand, one category, or one section of your retail business, and then think through how do you kind of scale up from there so you can work out the kinks as you go along. Ultimately, you're going to build authentic and abundant consumer voices across priority products, as well as just deliver your core product content more effectively, activate it across the shelf. Then you can measure it and then continue to iterate and improve. You don't necessarily want to go into a multi-quarter reinvention, but it really just depends on the size of your business and the complexity of your company. Sometimes it can take a fairly long time, but this is a nice blueprint. Think of it as step 1, step 2, step 3, as opposed to maybe 30, 60, 90. It'll still serve you very, very well in that context. So in terms of activating that playbook, the goal is not necessarily more content. The thing that we find over and over and over again, I'm sure Gregor finds this because he audits many, many different companies. I found this, managing these efforts at 2 different companies, both Unilever and the Hershey company. It's less about making more content. It's making the content related to your products much more consistent across the shelf and across all sorts of other touch points. It's not just the digital shelf. It could be any kind of touch point. And really keep the consumer and customer voice flowing where it's going to drive decision-making. And by decision-making, we mean conversion. So start with the diagnostic, pick one of the bottlenecks or a few of the bottlenecks that are really holding you back. Use the 90-day plan to stabilize your foundation across those bottlenecks, and then start to iterate and scale across the products and categories that matter the most to your business. If you want help mapping your red zones and turning this into a plan that your team can actually run, we can help you with the next steps. Gregor?
Yeah, all I would say is benchmark against your peers. It will help you focus on the high impact growth driving capabilities that will help you, unlock growth. And if I can leave you with one thing, don't chase AI theater until the content supply chain that feeds generative engine optimization and AI are solid.
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. We actually have a few minutes left. So I'm going to hit with you a couple questions. The first question would be the one that we were talking about just prior to entering the stage here, which is tell us about how you got your title, Chief So What Officer.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm very proud to be the only Chief So What officer on LinkedIn. Basically, with all of our benchmarking, all of the results that we generate, my job and the job of my team is to turn responses to benchmarks into actions. So to turn a list of questions into a list of actions. So what is the so what that manufacturers should be putting in place? And I love the title actually, because it really focuses me around making sure that in every conversation I have with manufacturers, I'm talking about, so this is what you should do. This is what you should do next. This is what you should do next in terms of building those capabilities and delivering against their growth objectives.
Yeah, that's great. Really cool title. And then as we were going through it and thinking through and even thinking about some of the comments here, if you're scrolling through there on the right-hand side, you know, what typically do you find when you're starting a Seek benchmarking exercise? What are typically the things that you most often find when you're starting to do some of those audits?
I think the first thing that we notice quite consistently across all of the manufacturers that we work with is that they have pockets of knowledge, pockets of expertise, and pockets of knowing what it is that they should be doing. But a lot of the time, their ways of working, their operations, their processes are the things that are holding them back, which is one of the things that I love about the content supply chain audit that we're doing, but also your concept of the content supply chain in the first place. Processes are one of the most underrated parts of generating digital commerce growth. Manufacturers always ask me, what's the low-hanging fruit when it comes to digital commerce? And I always reply, well, this is the piece of fruit that's hanging so low, you've got to bend over in order to pick it. There is growth that comes from improving your processes, improving your ways of working, really defining what some of those processes and roles and responsibilities are. And we see that in our data all the time. The manufacturers that have defined those processes, that have defined those ways of working, they grow significantly faster every single year than the manufacturers that haven't. So that's probably the thing that stands out to me most when we start doing this audit process, this diagnostic process with manufacturers.
Yeah, I think that's good advice to everybody here on the call, whether you're a brand or a retailer. My experience was always, particularly when you have something like AI, which is just so transformative and allows for like a real expansion of the way you can think about what a capability per se, in this case, just being AI broadly, can do for you. There's just so many use cases. But even before then, I remember standing up teams that were, this was a part of their job, right? Was to get at least the digital commerce component of content right. That was before I kind of like expanded into broader digital content across, all media marketing and sales touch points. And what you would find is that there'll be a few leaders, or they might be CMOs, they might be category leaders, they might be brand leaders, and they want to focus in on like, well, I want to do the most innovative thing possible. And my advice was very similar to the advice that you had, was like, you won't do any of those things until we can actually deliver, these 6 or 7 pieces of content on a consistent basis across, all these different retailer endpoints. Until we can do that consistently through really good process, we don't really want to do too much innovation because it's just going to distract us from the fundamental things that ultimately drive market share, revenue, ROI. So really, really good advice from you on that standpoint. Is there anything else beyond that process point that you typically see?
Look, when we look at the leaders and compare them to every other manufacturer that participates and responds to our benchmarks, the leaders stand out not because they're doing completely different things, but because they are doing everything better. There's no silver bullet in terms of capability. The years of strong double-digit growth and in some cases triple-digit growth in CPG are over now. Digital commerce is about iterative improvement. It's about how do we do what we've done before, but do it better, do it bigger? How do we learn from where we've been? And one of the disciplines that we see from those leading groups of manufacturers is they are going back and they're looking at what they've done and they're understanding the impact that it's having on their metrics. And then they're making decisions to improve them the next time around or not do them again if they haven't, positively contributed towards growth. Lots of manufacturers I've worked with, even the ones that I've been employed by, they talk about plan, do, review when they're launching new products or doing activations or bringing products to life in store and in the digital shelf. But actually, a lot of them miss out that review phase because there's the next thing's coming up and the next thing and the thing after that and the thing after that. But the way that we're going to get better going forward is that discipline of reviewing. The other thing that I've noticed in a lot of manufacturers, and again, the leaders really differentiate themselves here, is that the leaders are using data to create actions, not presentations. And I see a lot of manufacturers who have lots of presentations talking about their performance and talking about lots of different metrics and talking about all of the things that they're measuring on the digital shelf. But actually, the leading manufacturers are the ones that are genuinely looking at them and going, right, what does this tell us to do? What is the trend here? I fervently believe that most manufacturers already have access to more data than they know what to do with. The challenge isn't access to data. The challenge is knowing what to do with it. And again, one of the reasons why I like this content supply chain process is that it forces you to go back and look at the data and understand what it's telling you and understand how effective things have been, and then review and then act again and again and again, and constantly keep your content fresh, constantly keep it to the most effective, the most impactful, the most sufficient that it can be without wasting any money, without wasting any resource or effort. It's forcing you to act in the right ways. And I think more and more manufacturers as we go forward, the ones that are going to be truly successful are the ones that are going to lean into processes like this. They're going to lean into using that data to understand what is working and what isn't working for them, and then using that knowledge to engage their customers better, to satisfy their needs, their missions, their journeys better, to converse with them better, to attract them better, to convert them better, and also to drive their own profitability as a manufacturer at the same time. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, is create profitability for the businesses that we work for.
Yeah. So real quickly, there's a couple, I'm looking through the questions here and thought instead of getting back to people either in the chat or after the event, we could knock them out right now. So the first one is, is Seek is it a tool or is it a framework? Related question is the Seek audit a capability within BV or another company offering the service? So why don't you take the first part of the question? I will take the second part of the question.
Sure. So Seek is a framework for digital commerce success. When we started DCG, we went to a lot of big global multinational manufacturers and we asked them, in the ideal world, what capabilities do you need in order to be excellent at digital commerce across the digital shelf, regardless of what channel you're selling in, regardless of what market you're selling in? Because every market's at a different level of digital commerce maturity. Every retailer is, every customer is as well, right? So how do you factor in those differences in maturity? We identified 45 capabilities. We've structured them into a framework that we call Seek. Seek stands for Strategy, Enablers, Execution, and Culture. And what this Seek benchmarking does is it looks at manufacturers, it compares them to their peers, their competitors in market, regionally, in category, globally, against a lot of different aggregates as well. And it helps you to understand where you're strong, where you're weak, where you've got gaps, but also what you should do first in order to start accelerating those capabilities to catch up with the market expectations, or to then also start accelerating against your peers, against your competitors. Cool. And we work with some really big brands, and sometimes we're helping them build effectively from scratch, and other times we're helping them to build competitive advantage, take share from their peers, and really accelerate their capabilities ahead of where the market is, so they can always build that disproportionate growth versus their competitive set.
Right. And I'll just jump in on the second part of the question, which is this part of BV or separate? It's a separate company, to be very, very clear. And to give everyone context, Bazaarvoice has been talking about content supply chain for a couple of years now. And one of the questions you always got are like, well, what are my next steps? And I typically would go through like the 30, 60, 90 or the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. But then when it came to like certain questions, I could answer them from the vantage point of being a former CDO at a company very much like the company of many of our clients and understanding retail really well. But the one thing that we've concluded is there's certain things that Bazaarvoice is expert in, and one would be user-generated content, the use of user-generated content and how to distribute that content, which is one huge piece of the content supply chain. But there was other elements of the content supply chain that we couldn't very easily ascertain or audit for other folks because it wasn't part of our core business. And so we knew of Digital Commerce Global and the fact that they do a full-blown kind of digital marketing, digital commerce audit. And I thought that that was probably, and the teams thought that this was probably the missing piece. And this is the reason why DCG is here today. So hopefully those answers those two questions in the chat. Gregor, I think we have just a couple minutes left. And there's just a couple of other things here, maybe in the Q&A that we can hit. So the first thing is, yes, of course, all the presentations for the entire day, including recordings, will be available to any folks that are on the event stream and on our lists and who have registered. So you'll get those, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes as well. And the other thing would be a question or maybe a comment. It would be nice to have QR codes on products where they could get extra info while in store, all the stuff you may want to know that may not be on the box or product itself. That gets the consumer information, but keeps them from comparison shopping while searching extra info. There are actually use cases quite similar to that many retailers have put in place. And I think you're going to see much more use of AI and dynamic experiences, which will take advantage of a content supply chain in physical environments as opposed to just in digital environments. I think digital environments are getting all the press right now, particularly with all the agentic shopping announcements have been made over the last month or so. But don't kid yourself, the majority, at least in the West, of retail purchases still happens in store. And all of those purchases are being enabled through digital as well and can take advantage of a digital content supply chain, certainly, whether it's through QR codes or in-store display or whatever it might be.